Welcome to the Living Spiritfully podcast, the Mind Body Misfits edition. Here are your hosts for today, Paul Galloro and Claudia Micco.
Here we are. It's our first time seeing each other since last year. Happy New Year.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Happy New Year and aloha.
Hi. You look
Hi.
amazing. I have to say, 2024 really agrees with you.
Thank you. And you look amazing too, as always.
You.
Your
Thanks.
eyes are sparkling. It is
You know,
Capricorn something.
yeah. Well, I only compliment other people so they can compliment me in return. So
Right.
thank you for doing that. Claudia Micco, how are you doing? How is your holidays?
Holiday was wonderful, busy. It's really nice to be busy again, and my brain is trying to catch up with my body. Right now, usually it's the other way around.
It's so funny
Body's trying to
because
catch up with my brain.
yeah, I love that because I have a picture in my mind. I've been following this, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I've been following this Instagram uh, uh, um, uh, profile that talks a lot about neurodivergence, which is our topic for the day. But they always have like these cartoons of a brain. So I was just imagining like your
I
body
love
running
that.
and the brain cartoon just kind of like sitting in a couch.
I love that one. I love that cartoon one.
So funny.
So funny.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love that you're here, and I love that we are talking about neurodivergent thinking and neurodivergence because, first off, I want to say thank you to you for bringing just neurodivergence into my awareness. A lot of people that are listening to the podcast, I'm sure, have heard you say, or have heard us say this word. Um, but it kind of like stuck out at me when my therapist said to me, Paul, the things that you're describing sound very much like adult ADHD. And I was like, wait a second, you're right. And then I started to look into it more, and it's such a fascinating topic. I have to say, I feel seen and I feel appreciated in this world finally. And it's all thanks to you. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. And your therapist
And my
for
therapist, yes.
confirming my unofficial diagnosis.
Well, he didn't officially confirm it, but he also pointed it out. So I'm like, all right.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's something I think a lot of trainers and especially group trainers, they tend to gravitate towards this kind of work
Mhm.
because it really does do the physical and the mental that neurodivergent people need. And we'll have to define this a little bit better because the definition is constantly changing. Where it
Mhm.
used to be just the autism, it was just autism, and then it became an autism spectrum, and then they started to include other things like ADHD and ADD and some other type of brain issues into there. So
Mhm.
let's
Yeah.
dig in.
Let's dig in. I love this. I'm so excited. And silence. That's
This
my favorite part,
and who's
especially.
gonna start?
All right.
Okay, so
Let's
we'll talk. So tell me a little bit about what you have been learning about what the definition of neurodivergence is.
Okay, so just in a nutshell, and this is not me like, this is just me talking from everything that I've heard. Neurodivergence is really different ways of our brain functioning compared to what's considered neurotypical. So neurotypical is the way that we've been told the brain is supposed to work. It does this and does this. A lot of stuff about executive functioning and different parts of like the frontal lobe and different parts of the brain. For somebody that's neurodivergent, it doesn't fire up the same way as somebody who would be considered neurotypical. Now,
Right.
that being said, as you mentioned, we're constantly learning, we're constantly evolving what the definition is, and finding so many ways that neurodivergence shows up. So that's really how I would uh, in my neurodivergent ways.
The way we talk about it.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and I always knew something was different about me, even when I was younger. And I was in fourth grade, the first time that my teacher, Mrs. Highlander, who used to hum because she'd get so mad at everybody in class for being disruptive. And I sat right behind my friend Marty Carluccio, who knows, might end up listening to this. And
Hey,
we were in
Marty.
fourth grade and he was hilarious, but he was probably, neurodivergent as well as I was. And he just had me giggling, laughing all the time. Eventually, they split us up.
Yeah.
And but in my report card, I remember this to this day. I can even see it in my mind what she wrote. She wrote, Claudia is absent-minded. And that was one thing she wrote. She wrote a bunch of stuff, but that was the one thing that I remember in fourth grade, her saying about me, that I was absent-minded. And it always stuck with me. And I spent my whole life trying not to be absent-minded until I went to Strong, Stretch, and Centered and learned how my brain worked,
Mm,
because I could never sit in school. And they didn't talk about this stuff back then.
mhm.
They just, and I didn't get put in a special class, but I had a really hard time with school. I wasn't that I wasn't smart. I could, pass the test studying at the last minute, but
Yeah.
I could never get my assignments done on time. I would miss days of school. I just could not function sitting still and trying to focus. I just
Mhm,
couldn't do it. So the only, what I excelled in, of course, were subjects that I was interested in.
yes.
Art.
Yeah.
Art teacher loved me, anything I was interested in, social studies, gym, things like that. So
Mhm.
that was the first time in my life that I became aware that something was different. And my family history is bipolar, schizophrenia, alcoholism, addiction, a lot of mental illness in my family that my family doesn't talk about, obviously, or
Mhm.
now they start talking about it more. But
And you talk
serious,
about it on the podcast, so.
yeah, I've talked about it on the podcast. I don't mind. And things like that, where my aunt was very young when she was sent to mental hospital, and spent her entire life in Greystone until they sent her to another one when they closed them all down. So she was probably just a very creative woman who thought outside the box, and then had some addiction problems, and then became uh, ill, and then they just put her away.
Ugh,
And
man.
nowadays, fortunately, they don't.
Mhm,
So that was my introduction to knowing that something was just different about me.
mhm,
And it wasn't until I was about 18 when I got the tools that worked for my type of brain
mhm,
to be able to function properly in
mhm.
this world.
Yeah. See, for me, I've always known, and I've been saying this for years, and now it's actually become a joke, like with my partner and stuff. I'm in this world, I'm not of this world. So I don't because like I'll be doing something and neurotypical people will look at me and be like, What are you doing? How are you even thinking that?" I also, and because you and I have talked about this just like within ourselves, how we recognize patterns in a way that others don't recognize patterns, so that I know something's gonna happen without knowing something's gonna happen, just because I don't know, I can tell. And most of the time it ends up happening. But I've always been like that, and people don't always understand the angle that I'm looking at things when I'm like, it's so obvious to me. But I've
It's
always
so
really known it.
obvious.
But so in school, it's interesting because I think for me in school, um, I was good. Like it would take me forever to do my homework. And I would always go from this to this. I was very much probably like you and Marty, very like, I would always talk to people. Every now and then I'd like need to get up and go do something, or I needed something in my hands to play with. But I never like I still got good grades and I still was able to do all the stuff that I was able to do. I also was very social. So like, I don't know, I would talk to everybody. Teachers loved me. Um, but I wasn't super disruptive. I was very likable. I don't know. But it really didn't become a problem for me until I started working on my own. When because especially learning a lot, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, about body doubling and all of that stuff. Now it makes sense why a lot of things happened the way they did and why I thrive in collaboration with others and why sometimes like if left to my own devices, it just takes a really long time for it to happen. It'll happen, but just not, as soon as somebody expects it to.
Right. So that's a typical ADHD thing, attention. So they call it attention and deficit hyperactivity disorder, but it's really not that if you actually have it.
Yeah.
You're not hyperactive necessarily, at least as a woman. This might be a little different. There is some differences in male and female brain, but it's a dopamine thing. So it's a chemical in the brain that the brain is constantly searching for. And if it's not getting it, you actually can be very exhausted, not hyperactive, which, doesn't really fit the, what they say and what people actually who are more neurotypical, because I like this term better, neurodivergent and neurotypical, but it does have to be defined as, is it more ADHD? Is it autism? Is it on the spectrum? And in my own conversations, sometimes when I'm reviewing these videos, I can really see how I'll go into a neurodivergent rant, but then I'll bring it all back to then what we were talking about right away, which is ADHD and the definition and how it isn't hyperactive. See how I just did that?
I see what you did there.
But that's how the brain works. And I think one of the things that people who might be neurodivergent think they are, if they don't have a diagnosis, it's good to study and understand how your brain works. If you can find interest in learning about it, and it's complicated and it does take time to understand it, but if you can understand how your brain works and then start looking at your own life patterns, you got to go back a little bit. It may not be pretty for some people, but if you are really good at seeing your own patterns, it's worth a shot looking at that and then finding out the activities, physical activities that stimulate you, mental activities that stimulate you, overstimulation, right? For some people like me, I may seem outgoing and I'm a trainer and I can do 100 things at once. But honestly, it wears my brain out to the point where if I do too much teaching, I need to not talk to anybody at all.
Yeah.
For a while. And
Yeah.
I think that hurts some of my relationships because it's like, well, she's not going to go out. Don't ask her, or they think I'm antisocial.
Yeah.
But like she's so social when she's teaching, not just because it's my job, but it's almost like you're wearing a sort of mask in some sense. You're putting on your teaching suit and you're working. And it's not an act. I mean, it's how I feel when I'm in that moment. But when I'm out of that moment, and I think maybe a lot of other teachers may feel that way about their own life, their own teaching, and have this sense of, by learning a little bit about how your brain works, you can find those things that stimulate you, that don't overstimulate you, and then learn how to say no.
Yes.
When you need to say no.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the big things for me was learning balance. As we're having this conversation, I'm reflecting back on a pretty significant friendship of mine that as I started to get more into the fitness industry and I was out there teaching all the classes, doing all the things, and then on the weekends when everyone else was going out to party, I'm like, I've literally partied all week teaching all of these classes.
Right.
my brain needs a break, but I didn't understand. I did not understand that. I didn't know that because I was always so outgoing, that it did affect some friendships and relationships because they just could not understand, or they looked. I remember this one friend kept on saying, I was what she said something about always needing to be safe, which is totally true. Now that I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I was in a situation where I didn't feel safe and I wanted to find safety, and safety wasn't being in a bar with loud music and all stuff. You know,
Right.
sound is a huge thing for me. If the sound, and my partner, he plays his music out of his phone, and that is to me like nails on a chalkboard. I can listen to nails on a chalkboard. I cannot listen to music, especially songs that I love, coming out of a tin can. And so it's like sound. If it's too loud or if it's too low, it literally like I have a visceral experience of how I
Yeah,
want to jump out of my body. You
there
know?
is a neuro divergent name for that, and I can't remember the term. There is a term for that, and that's common with autism. It's common with ADHD. And
Mhm.
remember, autism is a spectrum. So, um, there's all different levels of autism. So, um, that there's a little more give there. ADHD is probably the same way, but with now the term being neurodivergent, we definitely want to differentiate, because if you just have managed autism, like there's very high functioning. I have friends who are who don't know they're high functioning autistic, um, but I know I'm like, oh, they're high functioning autistic, just
Yeah.
because I know I've studied this enough to know, oh yeah, but I would never diagnose them. This is no.
Yeah. Is well, and you know what, to that point, I also just want to say I don't have like a specific diagnosis, but I also don't necessarily identify in certain ways with certain things, right? So like when my therapist said, "Oh, sounds like you're describing adult ADHD," I didn't automatically go and say, "I'm an adult with ADHD." I understand that my brain functions in that way, and I'll go look at ways that one with ADHD would function so I could get an understanding of how the brain would work. But I look at it more as like, this is just the brain that I have, and this is the way that it functions. And there are other ways that it can show up in the world. It doesn't have to look like my family or my friends or my peers or my colleagues or whoever. Like, my brain is the way my brain is, and because it's my brain, I know how to set up my life, and I know how to set up my schedule, and I know how to set up um and I know also how to be in relationship with others so that I can still at the end of the day be all the things that I here am promoting: harmony and peace and love, et cetera, et cetera. If any of
Right.
that stuff is making sense to
And no, it is. And it's also, when we're looking at the brain, it's a chemical thing. You're just a bunch
you.
of chemicals and a bunch of, neurons trying to fire. And you've got to have the right chemicals in between the neurons for things to function the way they should. And again, with exercise, it's a perfect way to get that dopamine,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
And epinephrine, and that seems to balance out the brain. And it doesn't have to be very much for neurodivergent people. It can be just like 3 days a week of walking, just any kind of movement, physical exercise. And then there's also something what we call hyper focus,
mm,
uh, which is the idea. And I can give you a perfect example of hyper focus is, and for example, when I am teaching, and when I used to teach big, huge classes, I block everything out, and I can literally hyper focus on exactly what's happening in that moment, literally without any kind of distraction. You could throw a bomb into the middle of the class, and I would just like, oh, we're just going to turn the stereo down a little bit, and you just keep going, and
mhm,
really like having like an orchestra, and you're the orchestra leader, and just the
mhm.
show must go on kind of thing. So there's an ability to hyper focus, get that kind of thing done. And then once you're done, you collapse kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that happens with all kind of projects too. I sent you a funny today. I love this one ADHD kid who, they're so cute. I love these kids now. I love these kids. I sound like an old lady. I love the kids. I don't have any, so I don't know like what they're doing. So I follow a couple of these kids who I resonate with. I literally could be their age. If like I met them, we'd probably just talk and act, just like we were the same age. But he had that one where he, he's all excited because he's got, he started planning something 3 weeks ahead. He did an hour of planning and he was very excited, and then literally forgot all about it until 12 hours before.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, this no water, no bathroom breaks. That's the other
food.
thing. And I've always been that way. Even when I was a kid, my mother used to drive her crazy that I would not go to the bathroom all day long. Or whenever I had to focus on something, it would just be no food, no water, no, nothing, just until I could get done with whatever I'm done. And that's not a good habit. So being aware of that, taking breaks to eat, if you have any sort of neurodivergent tendencies, is remembering like to bring food with you, to drink water, to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
That's something's really important.
Well, doing all of my kind of my study and my research. P.S. I'm going to put in the show's notes a link to a CBC. The show is called Ideas. It's on the CBC. It's their podcast. I'm going to put the link to it because I was listening to it and it tells you a little bit about the history. So neurodivergence has been something that has been, happening forever. And in this, they talk about there's 4 different brain types, I think is what they were saying. I can't remember them off the top of my head. But anyways, they were saying like our species wouldn't have survived if neurodivergent thinking and neurodivergent people didn't exist. It's like a lot of the like, actually a lot of, what do you call those people? Celebrities and stuff. Singers, musicians, actors, actresses, they talk a lot about them having ADHD and crediting it to their success because they think outside the box or they want to try something different or they're always curious. And I resonate with some of that too, because you're talking about hyper-focused. When I'm into something, I can't let it go. I literally see it in every little thing that I do. That's why like with astrology, I can find some like random tidbit about astrology because I'm so fascinated by it and never get bored of it.
Special interests. That's another
Yes.
thing. Very
Get me to
special.
sit down to do my taxes though, not interested.
Not interested, yes. Well, I'm sure, what's her name from Fatal Attraction was neurodivergent. What was her name? The one that, for any like crazy relationship stuff. Where she put the rabbit in the pot.
Okay,
I digress. But relationships are tricky for people who are neurodivergent because of the hyper focus. You will hyper focus on your partner and trying to make them, happy and this and that. And that's also not a good habit to get into either. So it's important to look at those things. I think we also I think they're starting to put like dyslexia and all these other type of things as well. Because if you have ADHD, there's a good chance you might have dyslexia or some form, maybe with numbers. I think that's called dyscalculia. I'm probably saying that wrong.
It's something.
But there's all different ways, and our brains really just rely on the balance of that dopamine, serotonin, and all those other chemicals, epinephrine, to stay balanced and to stay focused. And I would love to, in a way, I'd love to be neurotypical for a day, because to me, it just seems like it's such an easy life. It's expensive to have ADHD. No matter how hard you try, you can't keep your planner. I have thousands of planners, can't keep them. I have 10 notebooks all around the house.
Oh yeah.
With different things in them. trying to pay your bills on time, even with, it's just, there's things about ADHD that are very challenging. And like, like I said, it's expensive to have ADHD.
You know what it is for me with like, well, one of the things that I read up a lot about is like neurodivergent people generally like have poor, they can't tell time.
No,
And I've always been like that. I've like an hour can be a day. Like there's no, there I can't really tell that. I can't tell time. I can't tell distance. I can't tell quantity. Like it could be 5, it could be 500. I don't know. It all just looks the same to me. People are like, "Oh, how many meters?" I'm like, "I don't know.
oh,
It's
right.
there." You know what I mean? So it's really interesting, and I can't remember where I was going with that. Oh, about the time thing. It's like when it's the next month, and I think one of the reasons why I love astrology is because and one of the reasons why I follow the moon, because the moon kind of keeps me grounded because I can watch the phase of the moon and know, oh, okay, it's been a week since the last time I looked at the moon, or in 2
Yeah,
weeks time it's going to be this.
right.
But when it comes to like paying bills, I'm like, what, didn't I already pay that? You know what I mean? It's like, oh, that a month happened already. I swear I just sat down to pay that bill. Now I got to pay
Right.
the bill again. So I get the whole like
Yeah.
part of
And
things.
that's like more of an ADHD thing, whereas an autism thing is more like every single detail has to be like, I would be perfectly suited for someone who has autism because, or at some kind of autism, because they would be able to keep me on track. They need nice, things in order. And
Yeah.
we're doing this at 12:02. And then we're going to go on a walk at 3:45, and the walks, and those kind of details are really are good. And I'm not that person. I just have trained myself for many, many years to remember as often as it can to look at the clock so I know how much time I have, or I just know how long it takes to do something by feeling. I don't wear a watch. I can't
Neither do
wear
I.
a watch.
Yeah.
It makes me crazy. And that's another thing is textures, clothing. So one of the things I always
That's why I
had,
don't wear any.
that's why he doesn't wear any, is like wearing stuff can really be irritating. You don't feel right. You don't like things restricting you. And there's all these things about textures, certain foods you won't eat, not because you don't like them, but because you don't like the texture in your mouth. It doesn't mean with women, especially when I was in therapy, they try to tell you, you're whatever, you got bipolar or this or that. And it's totally not. It's just scatterbrained ADHD, whatever you want to, what does she call me?
Absent-minded.
Absent-minded. See, I am, obviously, because I couldn't remember. And again, 40 years later, 57 years, it was probably 50 years later.
Oh.
It's amazing how I could hyper focus on that one thing. I could barely read in 4th grade. I probably could read pretty well, but I was really, okay. So if you like something, I love reading. So I do remember in Mrs. Lombardo's class, I think that was 1st or 2nd grade.
There's a lot of Italians in your
I know.
your orbit as a child.
I finished all of the reading way ahead of all the students. And the teacher went and talked to my parents. I didn't find this out until later in my life, that they wanted to put me up a grade, that I was, that they should have, probably because of my birthday being in December, they put me in the grade prior instead of the grade ahead.
Right.
And so they were going to put me up a grade. But of course, my parents, they were very sweet, and they were like, well, we'd rather have her be the smartest person in the grade, a little older than the stupidest person in the next grade, which is their thinking, right?
Yeah.
Of course, in retrospect, it would have been way better and more challenging and more interesting for me to have been in the upper grade rather than being bored to tears in the other grade. So
Yeah.
that's just another little story. But in their
Mhm.
mind, they were doing me a favor.
Yeah. Um, I don't know what I was gonna say in response to
Well, you're absent-minded.
that. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about neurotypical fitness. What does that look like to you?
To me, neurotypical fitness is like doing the same thing, doing it like doing it very linearly, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. Like, like I love to, if I'm like, not just a squat, I want to do something different with the squat, or I want to move in a different way. Or if I'm doing so I teach a lot of like flowing movement, especially in my yoga classes. I like to, start with a flow and then bring in something else. So to me, neurotypical is like just doing everything linear and in a box as it's supposed to be, like a robot.
Mhm. And so more neurodivergent type fitness would have a little more play,
Yes.
right? A little more fun, a little more
Variety.
um, divergence, which is a good word. At least for the ADHD people and the autistic people on the spectrum may find they need a little bit more detail,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
and again, it really is all different levels, and just knowing your brain. So I would say to an instructor who may be wondering if they are neurotypical or more neurodivergent is to just start researching and studying these things and then seeing how you resonate with that, what your own patterns are, and then start getting, if you need to get a diagnosis, then get it. It's hard to get a diagnosis because there's no diagnostic tests. It's something that your therapist will probably, just like with you, begin to bring out
Hmm.
in your, and then you don't necessarily have to go on medication, although medication is amazing. I am not on medication, but I have taken ADHD medication, and if I need it, so I have my exercise routine well enough established in my life that I use that and music and different
Hmm.
things to keep the dopamine levels constant in my brain. But from time to time, I have a stash of Adderall, and I can take a half an Adderall once every blue moon,
Mm.
and it will get me through something that I feel like I won't be able to concentrate on. So I like that the stigma is being erased from some of this, and
Same.
we're not looked at as the weirdos, because I know I'm weird. Um,
Same.
I know that, but that's what people like about me. She's different.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
funny. I'm funny because I've had to be funny,
Yeah.
you know,
Hmm.
just to get on in the world. You
Yeah.
have a sense of humor when you are different. At least you should try to have a sense of humor, because you'll get beat down into this earth if you don't.
Hmm.
And there's also a lot of depression with neurodivergent people because we don't fit into society.
Yes, and we're constantly told that, we're not right, it can't be done the way that we want to do it, or there's always been a way where I felt like I couldn't do all the things that the neurotypical people could do, i.e., run a
Right.
business, or go to higher education and all of that stuff, um, which kind of sucks, and it also adds to and contributes to the exhaustion that goes with it, because like you said earlier, the masking, and then also the trying to fit in and like reconfigure myself in a way that just doesn't fit. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
it's a square peg in a round hole kind of thing.
exactly.
You're just like, you kind of fit, but you don't quite fit in.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the things that connects us in fitness is movement. And for those of us who use music, That's one way to bring together both types of people.
Yeah.
Neurotypical and neurodivergent can
Is it
really
music?
come together in our group fitness classes through music and movements,
Hmm.
and everybody's happy.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, so I love that that we talked a little bit about like some of the things that you do to help you kind of manage it. One of the things that and I've always been like this, but then, somebody had made a comment like, "Oh, why do you got to do that? You can't just remember that stuff." And I'm like, out of sight, out of mind. And I've been learning a lot more. So I have to like literally, I have lists of everything. That's why, just like you, I have so many notebooks because this notebook is for this. This one's my
Yeah.
planning notebook. This one's my to-do list notebook. This is my time telling notebook, my calendar notebook. Um, but I am actually, one of my projects that I've been working on the last couple of weeks is creating, and I'm pointing at it in my office where it will be, is creating a visual of my project. It's like my project board. So all the projects that I've got working on, the podcast is there, Arise is there, our Italy retreat is there. Just if I don't have like, because especially for us, Italy is not until September. I can easily keep it out of my mind, but there are things that we got to do leading up to that. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
having written down and not put in a drawer. I used to have things all over my desk when I was a kid, and my mom would come in and she would clean it all up and put it away, and then I would forget about it because
Italian.
it's hidden. Typical Italian. She didn't like a mess.
They
Uh,
don't like classes. Yeah.
but I need it out. Otherwise, I will just forget about it. And I was always made to feel like not good enough
Right.
because I needed to constantly write things down or have my lists or, have displays and
Have
stuff.
things out, important things out. And it's okay to have those things out. We do the pile system, uh, ADHD people. The pile system is you have a pile, and it's not efficient and
No.
it really doesn't work. But and no matter how much consciousness you put into that, there is a pile system. You put all this in a pile that you only understand.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
you know exactly, and not that I mean, my house is clean too, but I have things that are important out.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then things I know I'm going to forget about, I try to keep somewhere close. And then of course, when I put things in a drawer,
Yeah, I don't even remember what
it's
drawer I put it
open.
in.
Right. Well, yeah. Or you could say something like my favorite thing now is when it's not my favorite thing, but it's interesting. Whenever I have to like get into a bank account or something like that, and then they were like, okay, we're going to send you, a 6-digit password to your text. And then they send, 679, whatever those numbers are. And I'll be like, okay, 67432, 67. And
Yeah.
then the second I have to put it in, it's all gone.
Yeah.
It just is gone.
Can I
There's just
tell you?
no way.
Here's my tip. Usually those 6 digits, I remember them in like 57, 24, 32. Like that's how I
Yeah.
try to, and I make a song of it and I keep on singing it, like you said.
Yeah,
Um,
I try. The number thing has always been, my sister's the same, my little sister's the same way.
mm,
We're like, we still do this. Okay. 2, 3, 4, 5, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, January 7th, 8th, 9th.
yeah, that's why we have
Yeah.
fingers, right?
Right, we have 10 fingers. So we should have done it. This is the problem with being an American, not being on the metric system.
Mm,
It's 10 works when you're on the metric system.
yeah.
It doesn't work in
There
America.
you have it. I mean, there's so many. Okay, so
Okay.
one real thing that I want to say that I was introduced to years ago, and like the thing is with a lot of these like things for ADHD or neurodivergence, like I'll use it for a period of time and it works, and then there's a period of time where it doesn't work. It's like ebbs and flows. So I always have these like various things that work depending on like depending on my mood basically is what one would say. But the Pomodoro system, are you familiar with Pomodoro technique?
I'm familiar with the tomato.
That's what the word is. So it was The Pomodoro technique is you take a block of time and you break it down into 20-minute segments. So let's say you're going to do work for 2.5 hours.
Yes.
You set a
Okay.
timer for 20 minutes. You do your work in that 20 minutes and then you stop, and then it's a 5 or 10 minute break that
Mhm.
you do, and then you can do whatever you want. And then the next, 20 minutes you focus. And then at the end of that 2.5 hour period with your 20 minutes on, 10 minutes off, you then have a longer break. And I
Nice.
was introduced to that many years ago. The reason why it's called the Pomodoro technique is because the guy that invented it used a little kitchen. He was one of us, an Italian guy, had a little kitchen timer that was, those tomato timers
Oh,
that.
yeah, yeah, the tomato timer.
So that's why I called it the Pomodoro technique. He'd
Oh,
spin
that's
it
cute.
to a certain time, do his thing, the timer goes off, then he'd take his break. That really works for me, as well as keeping things out. But what I've learned to do is like for vitamins and stuff like that, I have like a pretty display thing. So I don't just have like 50 different bottles on my, counter. I have like a cute little thing that I have where just my pills for the day are there, my little vitamins, and then
Oh,
I
that's
remember to take.
impressive. Yeah, literally have in my fridge, I have a big tub of supplements that I never take. So the most important ones I have to have straight out. It's an interesting thing. I wonder if other people who have ADHD are the same way, with remembering to take their medications and supplements.
Mhm.
It's a curious thing. I hope maybe one of our listeners will chime in on that. I don't know if I'm the
Yes.
only one who's like that.
No. You know what I do is I literally have lists, like at the end of the day in my kitchen, this is what I do before I go upstairs. I wipe the counter, I put my supplements out for
That's
tomorrow, I fill up
amazing.
the water bottle. I need that list because
Yes.
otherwise I'm just like
You
flase
need
dom all over
structure.
the place.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's
And
the that's what helps ADHD. I mean, you have to have structure, but yet you want to do everything off the cuff.
yeah.
And that's, partly because we are quick thinkers. We're good in emergencies. Our
Hmm.
jobs that we do well are things that other people might be frightened of doing, like being an EMT or something like that, where you have to be really on in an emergency. It's because of the hyper focus.
Yeah.
You'll be great at that. There's some of the best personal trainers are people who are neurodivergent because they're able to 100% focus on their client,
Hmm.
and their client really feels that from them, and they're hooked for life because they love what they do. They hyper focus on it,
Hmm.
and people are very attracted to that.
Yeah.
You know,
Totally.
it's a really good thing.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
just important that we try to um not overdo everything and get burned out,
Yes. Absolutely.
because then you just lay there. Yeah.
And literally don't move for days. Not talking to somebody, not talking to anybody, not listening to anything, not eating,
Yeah.
nothing. Um, I mean,
It's
speaking of hyper focused, I feel so hyper focused on this conversation right now. I'm sure we could
okay,
go
but
on
we have
forever,
to, yeah,
but we need
we need
to
to
wrap it up.
wrap it up.
Yes, before the cane comes out and pulls us off. So
Yeah.
this is like I'm excited to kind of lean into this a little bit more in 2024. Personally, like I'm not saying I learned that I'm neurodivergent. I'm accepting my neurodivergence, and just that alone puts my body at ease, and I feel like I can take on the world, as opposed to before thinking like being constantly tensed because I'm not neurotypical. But
Exactly.
that's kind of where I'm in, and I love that we, as the Mind Body Misfits, both neurodivergent, both loving movement, both loving the brain, and both loving taking care of our bodies and helping others take care of their bodies. We're going to be working with this a little bit more in the work that we do together. So any other neurodivergent Mind Body Misfits that are out there, we are working on things for us to continue thriving in this wellness sphere. So I'm looking forward to
Excellent. Yes, I love that. And Mind
that.
Body Misfits came up before you were told by your therapist that
Yeah, exactly.
and I was right away hooked on it because I always have thought I was a misfit. I just didn't fit in.
Same.
But I always tried to fit in. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of perfectionism that comes along with this, this situation. I don't want to call it a problem or a disorder. I think it's not a problem as long as you understand what's happening and can ride those waves and understand your patterns.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah, I don't like this word disorder. I don't look at it as that. I just look at it as a beautiful expression of my fabulous brain being different and learning to I don't want to say work with it, but learning how to lean into my strengths and other people's strengths where I fall short. So that's
Right, exactly. And look, if you're an adult and you're finding these things out, you may look into your past and realize, like for me, I just use my own examples. I can never have a job where I have to sit at a computer all day. I
don't
can't
even
do
mention
things.
that
There's certain
again.
things that I just like, I'll quit that job. I've quit many jobs. Like I was a waitress once and that was a disaster. So there's just certain things I can't, like, I know. And so when you're in even looking at jobs, you have to look like, oh, it may be great money. It may be this. But if you think even for 1 second that you're not going to be able to manage it, it'll be worse for your brain to try and stay with it. I'm not saying quit your job. I'm just saying lean into things that you really enjoy,
Mhm.
because then you can hyper focus and then you can do better than anybody else in that job.
Yeah.
You'll make yourself irreplaceable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think like you can have that sit at your desk all day job, but set it up in a way that you're not sitting at your desk all day, right? Maybe you stand up, maybe you schedule yourself to do your little pomodoro and take your break to go do onto something else. That's why it takes me a little bit longer to finish projects because I literally work on four at the same time. 20 minutes on
Right,
this one, and then I go when I feel drawn to
right.
that one. Like I'll lay them all out and I'm like, for the next 3 hours, I'm just going to cycle between these. And that's okay. Your boss might not like it, but I come from the school of it'll get done
It's very
the time that it needs to
entrepreneurial.
get done.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very entrepreneurial, and people who are neurodivergent tend to be more entrepreneurial
Mhm.
because that's what works for them,
Yeah.
and big thinkers,
Yeah.
out of the box thinkers.
Abs-
So, and books 5 or 6 at a time as well.
That's it. That's a
Sometimes
light
7.
reading
I've had
cycle.
7. I remember in the 90s having 7 next to my bed, and this guy I was dating was like, you read all of those? And I'm like, yeah, but I don't read them all at once. And I
Yeah.
don't read a book cover to cover. I read a couple chapters of this book, and then I read a couple chapters of that book, and all boring stuff to them because it's all nonfiction.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I get that. But okay, so
Anyway, okay, we're done
listeners,
with this. We're going to
we're
try and end this. We're going to end
yes,
this madness.
we're just gonna stop it now. No, listeners, check out the show's notes because I'm gonna include the link
Uh,
to the CBC podcast that I was listening to about neurodivergence. It's super interesting, Claudia. I think you're really gonna enjoy it. And
okay.
remember, the Mind Body Misfits are going to Italy in 2024. There is space available, so check out the show's notes for that link. Spaces are filling up though, so if you want to come with us for a week under the Tuscan sun. Check the show's notes for all that details. Claudia Micco, I'm so excited for 2024 for so many reasons.
Me too.
Number one of those main reasons is you. So
Aw, you too.
I
Yeah,
can't wait to work with you more. I love you so much.
love
Do you
you
want to
too.
take us home?
Okay. Why fit in when you were born to stand out?
She did it. I
did
love
it.
you all. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody. Aloha.
The Living Spiritfully podcast is a Spiritful production. Executive producer, Paul Galloro. Co-producers, Claudia Micco and Catherine Stilo. A big thank you and much love to you, the Living Spiritfully community, for liking, subscribing, sharing, and supporting this podcast.